until nothingness. V'lo yiga, there shall not shine shviv isho, even a flash or a spark of his fire. Bildad here depicting the absolute darkness of the world of the wicked. Verse 6, Or hoshach be'oholo, v'nero olo v'yid'och. The light has become darkened in his tent. Or hoshach, the light is darkened in his tent. That is to say, even if the light of God were there, since the wicked has his eyes elsewhere, he will not see it, and therefore the true light is darkened in his tent. V'nero olav yid'och, his candle, his very soul upon him will be extinguished. Yitzeru tza'adei ono, v'sashlichehu atzosoi. Yitzeru tza'adei ono, tza'adei ono, the footsteps of his strength. Yitzeru, they will become tsar, narrow. What was once his path of prosperity and success, the wide path of success, will become narrow. V'sashlichehu atzoso, his very eitzah, his very counsel, sashlichehu, shall cast him aside. And why? Verse 8, Ki shulach bereshes beraglov, v'al svocho yishaloch. Ki shulach bereshes beraglov, for he is sent forth, ki shulach, he sent forth bereshes, with a reshes, a series of a trap in his feet, beraglov in his feet, v'al svocho, on a woven, coarsely woven cloth that is sure to trip him up. Yishaloch, he will be walking. Yochiz be'okiv boch, yachazik olov tzamim. Verse 9. Yochiz be'okiv boch, a pach shall he take hold of with his akev, with his ankle. The ankles will take hold of the pach, the trap will take hold of his ankles. The pach, a pit. Yachazik olov tzamim, the tzamim, which is, says the Mesudat David, like the word tzmeim, the thirsty. The thirsty will be strengthened upon him. Precisely how that relates to the first part of the pasuk is a little obscure. According to the Targum, the Tzamim are powerful people, Gavrayo. The people will, God here would be the subject of the verbs, that God is placing the trap at his very feet where he least expects it, and God will strengthen against him the Tzamim, these mighty people. Tomun bo'oretz Chavlo umalkudeto ali nosiv. Tomun bo'oretz chavloi. In the land is buried his chevel, the rope that will be tying him up. Umalkudeto ali nosiv. The malkodet, another for a trap. The malkodet, the trap, Ali Nasiv, will be upon his pathway. Soviv bi'asuhu v'alohois v'hefitzuhu l'raglov. Soviv bi'asuhu valahois. The valahois are some kind of terrible demons, frightening demons that cause consternation, and they will terrify him all around. Soviv bi'asuhu, around, shall terrify him, these valahois, these terrifying demons. V'hefitzuhu l'raglov. They shall be striking him down to his, on his legs, down to the ground. That is Rashi's pshat. They shall strike him in a way that he will stumble and fall. Yehi ro'iv ono ve'id nochon letzal'o. Yehi ro'iv onoi. His former strength shall be hungry. Ve'id nochoin letzal'o. Disaster is prepared firmly for his tzelah, for him to fall onto his ribs, his final disaster. Yochal badi oiroi, yochal badov bechur moves. Very terrible curses against the wicked, expressed now by Bildad Hashuchi. He shall eat the very limbs of his skin. Yochal badei oiro is eating up the limbs of his skin. Yochal badov bechor moves, the firstborn of death, that is the angel of death, shall be eating his limbs. And another connotation of the expression badov would also be any children or descendants, all will get eaten up. Yinosek me'oholoi miftaho. He shall be torn away from the tent that was his source of trust. Allusion in the tent is he will be torn away from his wife, who will be left widowed, and the wife in whom he trusted, he will be torn away from her. Batatz idehu the melech balohois, and she indeed, his very wife, will make him step forward on the path to the king of these balohois, the king of these terrible demons. Tishkone ba'holo mibli lo yezoire al novehu gofris. Tishkone be'holo, she shall dwell in his tent, the widow, mibli lo, without being to him, he's not there. Yezoire al novehu gofris, they shall scatter over his dwelling place sulfur to make it totally desolate. Yivoshu, verse 16, mitachas shoroshov yivoshu, umima'al yimal ktsiro. Mitachas, from underneath, shoroshov, the roots of the wicked, yivoshu, shall get dried up. Umima'al, and up above, both above the earth and in the supernal world above, yimal kitsiro, the kotzir, the harvest, any harvest of seeming profit brought in by the wicked, yimal, shall be cut off. Zichroi ovad mini oretz, velo shem lo al panei chutz. Zichro ovad mini oretz, his memory will have been lost from the earth, all memory of him shall go. Velo shem lo al panei chutz, there's no name to him on the face of the outer places. He will not be publicized, he will no longer be known. Yehtafuhu me'or el choshech. Umitevel yeniduhu. Yehtafuhu me'or el choshech. They shall push him and sweep him out from the light down to the darkness. Umitevel Yiniduhu, and from the Tevel, from the earth, Yiniduhu, they shall drive him out like a nido, like an outcast. Lo ninlo, velo neched, verse 19, lo ninlo, not a nin, not a great-grandson, lo neched, not a grandson, be'amo, in his people, ve'ein sorid b'magurov. There's neither a lo nin lo v'lo neched, there's neither a son or a grandson or a great-grandson in his people. Ve'ein sorid, there is no sarid, no survivor. B'magurov. Magurov could have a number of different connotations. It could be simply his dwelling place, but it could also refer to those that he used to terrify. Anyway, his influence will all be lost, it will all be gone. Aliyomo noshamu aharoinim v'kademonim ochazu so'ar. Aliyomo, over his day of disaster, noshamu aharoinim, the latter people that are after it, they shall be in a state of devastation when they witness the divine vengeance against the wicked. V'kadmonim, as for the former people, the earlier people, and perhaps that would be the elders, those who saw him in the days of his prosperity, says the Metzudat David, v'kadmonim, those who saw him in his former days, ochazu so'ar, that takes hold of them, so'ar, this raging wind of terror. Ach ile mishkonois avol, v'zeh makom lo yoda'il. Ach ile, but these, all of this that I have stated concludes Bildad Hashuchi, this picture of complete desolation and complete obliteration. These are the Mishkanois Avol. This is the dwelling place of Avol, of the sinner, the corrupt. V'zeh makom lo yoda'il. This is the place that did not know God. So here we conclude Bildad Hashuchi's response to Job in the second cycle of the addresses, and we see that once again Bildad Hashuchi has simply not addressed Job's real question and predicament. So with that, my dear friends, we will now conclude the Tanakh study for today, and with God's help in just a few minutes we will come to our Mishnah study.
Ah mitzvah shamos gerisu charisu layoy mashvi kechalu ma'nayoy seyu meshivutzu lehoyde mirushiu vikachiyu v'mama kol asher uvosu vayechal Elokim bayoy mashvi melachto yasher uvosu. Sei kol zeida yakoy khabi kid vara melech vedu soy ya koy besmoya besam nigufoy veshu soy oy kol mavas Yisrael yasi yeso meshoy khatu yedecho kal kanoy venoy ka Try yoy mashvi zuchoy veshumoy leyukai samchay bevil yam shulay yebnechut avikai yevim bidei shemay seyichu benachal adonechut sashkai azoy lashoy zi
Shalom once again, and back to our studies now. And just to clear up any misunderstandings, because of the clock changes in North America a week ago, apparently in order to make Purim a seemingly longer day, I got a bit mixed up here because Israel only goes on to summertime this coming Friday morning. So God willing, from next week on, we'll be back to the usual syncing of our earlier times. But this week I've started an hour earlier than my usual time here in Israel, and I thought to give a break between the first section of today's studies, our Kollel studies, and the weekly Shavuot Tov, in the hope that this would give YouTube more time to process the Kollel study broadcast and not cause problem enabling us from here to broadcast again the next live broadcast. Previously, with only half an hour between one and the other, YouTube apparently was having difficulty with us. You will need to refresh your Azamra live class page if you wish to join me again for the Shavuot Tov, which will be at 17:30 Israel time, and times as notified on the Azamra website and in the diary adjusted for North American summertime. So with that, let us now turn to our Mishnah, to the Holy Mishnah in chapter 8. Shalom, today, the 21st of Adar of the year 5777, corresponding to the 19th of March of the year 2017. And we continue now with our studies in Mishnah Shabbat in the beginning of chapter 8, following on from the previous chapter, which started with a digression into all of the 39 forbidden labors of the Shabbat, but then returned to what has actually been the subject of most of the tractate until now, the subject of carrying in and out from one domain to the other, from the home to the street, from the public domain to the private domain, or vice versa. And as the second half of chapter 7, the Mishnah had came to its really intended point. The digression about the 39 labors came after we had heard about what animals may go out with on the Shabbat and what men and women may go out with on the Shabbat. And the Mishnah, because it wanted to learn Mishnahs 3 and 4 of chapter 7, the klal of the Shabbat, the rule of carrying on the Shabbat, what constitutes a minimum quantity of carrying in each case of all kinds of different things. Now in chapter 8 we continue with the Mishnah's very specific listing of what items carry what minimal quantity if they are carried out from one domain to another on the Shabbat, making a person liable for the transgression of the Shabbat. In other words, here again we are dealing with the concept of the malacha, the labor of hotza'ah, carrying out, which is the slenderest of all the labors, the one involving probably the least effort of all, carrying a pin out from inside the house to outside the house. What is it people think? But it's actually one of the prohibitions of the Shabbat to carry out from the private domain to the public domain, or vice versa. But the carrying has to be malacha machashevet. It has to be malacha, a labor that is machashevet, with an aspect of mind and thought in it, an intentional act of labor. So what constitutes carrying out something as opposed to just a piece of fluff or a piece of dust or a piece of sawdust? What constitutes actually carrying varies from item to item. And the continuing very specific measures given in this chapter, and then after another little digression in the following chapter, these give us a fascinating insight into the world of the Mishnah. the world of the Mishnah is a kind of ideal world where people behave as people are supposed to behave. And one of the things that people in the ideal world of the Mishnah observe is the prohibition of bal tashchis, the needless destruction of food and other useful items for human beings. Bal tashchis do not destroy wantonly. This is, in our modern prosperous world, one of the most violated of all of the prohibitions of the Torah, to wantonly waste all kinds of things, to this throwaway world that we live in. And one of the things we may learn from the coming very beautiful section of our Mishnah discussing the different measure in the case of each item is how very conservative people were, how very you might say environmentally conscious, that they would want to preserve things. These were not fat, over-prosperous people. These were people, an agrarian society, living on their farms and laboring day by day and involved in all the different aspects of life. So beginning now in Perek Ches, Mishnah Aleph, chapter 8, the first Mishnah, Hamotzi Yayin. Suppose somebody carries out wine from the house into the street on the Shabbat. How little would they have to carry out to already be liable to just a spot of wine is not going to help anybody. So the measure is, according to the Mishnah, Kedei Mezigas Hakos, in order to pour out the cup. Our Mishnah is telling us that, indicating that the wine in the times of the Mishnah was very strong and full of flavor in those days, to the point that it would be treated much the way that people today treat syrups and concentrates of different kinds of flavorings, the most terrible concoctions of orange and pineapple and other flavors with heaven knows what additives and color ingredients. But for them, the wine was this very thick syrup which you'd fill up a quarter of the cup of the Kiddush on Friday night, or the Havdalah, or the cup of the Birkat HaMazon when blessing the grace after meals, over a cup. And the minimum quantity of a kos is in Hebrew called a revi'it alog. It is a quarter of a log, and the amount of wine that would be needed to make a full revi'it would be just a quarter of a revi'it at the bottom. You then add pure water from the land of Israel to make a full cup. And so if a person took out a minimum of wine of this quantity on the Shabbat, they would all be liable to a sin offering. It was done unwittingly. Now, had they taken out a smaller quantity than that with their own specific purpose in mind, that would come into the category of what we learned in the third Mishnah, that if there is a particular individual, the third Mishnah of the previous chapter, the chapter 7, Mishnah 3, we learned that if a person had a particular intention in what is carrying out, even though this may not be everybody's intention, then for that person, if he carries out that smaller quantity, that is already prohibited. But for a regular person taking out wine, for a regular person, it will be this minimal quantity. Chalav, if it was milk, kedei gemio, enough for a person to gulp down some milk. Devash, kedei litein al akosis. If it's honey, in order to put on the kosis, according to some interpreters, is a wound on the outer skin of a horse or a donkey through the constant friction of the saddle or the items that the animal is carrying, and the kosis would be a place that was inflamed because of this friction. And devash, honey, organic honey of ancient times, was, as is known to people who pursue alternative medicine today, natural honey is indeed a wonderful curative. And there is another interpretation of the the kosis, that it could also be a boil of a human that is forming a head, and indeed in natural medicine it's known that the application of honey to a boil has the power to draw out the pus from underneath. Shemen gedelosuch ever cotton. If it was oil the person was carrying out, well, oil is a very precious commodity, and enough if the person was simply anointing the smallest limb of a child, namely the little toe. That's already a meaningful quantity of oil to be taken out from domain to domain. That constitutes the forbidden labor of hotza'ah. Mayim k'delo shuf bohem es hakilor. Water, sufficient quantity to saturate with them the kilor, which is a salve for the eye, a curative salve which was known in antiquity both to the Jews of Israel and also in other places of the Mediterranean. And this salve, if you took enough water simply to lubricate the kilor, that will be a quantity of water, that clean water, that would make the person liable to the chatos, sin offering, if done unintentionally on the Shabbat. Usheor kol hamashkin bervius. All other mashkin, all other beverages, revius, the quantity that we heard earlier in relation to the wine. When we talk about the wine, there's enough wine to constitute a quarter of the total revius. The revius, the quarter log of the Mishnah, is about a nice wine cupful. So any other beverage also, the revius is considered to be the quantity of liquid that constitutes a drink for a person. Anything less is not called a real salve of thirst. V'chol hashifochin berevius, and also all of the waste water that's got to be poured out. Berevius, the measure would be a revius. Now this has practical implications in a place where a person has dirty water in their house. They cannot directly throw the water out into the public domain from the house. So this has applications in the halacha. What they may do is pour the water into their yard, and if the water later flows out to the street, that is not considered to be a violation of the prohibition of carrying on the Shabbat. Well, now Rabbi Shimon comes in and takes issue with all of the previous Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon omer kulon berevius. Rabbi Shimon says all of the above liquors that we've been speaking about, including the wine and the milk and the honey, all the person would only be liable if they carried out a minimal quantity of a revius. And the above measures, in the view of Rabbi Shimon, are for somebody who put the specific substance aside for himself for that specific purpose. Rabbi Shimon does not hold by the general rule that we learned in chapter 7, Mishnah 3, that when a person puts anything away for their own use, be it even less than the measures we have learned so far and shall be learning, if they put less than that, for that person there will be a liability for carrying out that small quantity. Rabbi Shimon holds that even if a person takes out a minimal quantity of something, there has to be some minimal quantity. You can't just say, well, even if he only took out a drop, that he's already liable. The basic liability would always be a revius, a quarter log cupful of any of the above liquids. V'lo amru kol hashiyurin halalu, and they, the previous sages, did not say all of these measures Elo lematzni ehen, except for the specific people who are putting these things away for their own specific use, but not in a regular case. Continuing now with the second Mishnah of chapter 8. Hamoitzi chevel, somebody who takes out a piece of string. Kedei lasois oizen lekupo, in order to make a handle for a basket. The chevel is a kind of coarse cross between what we call rope and string that would be useful for this purpose. Gemi kedei lasois talai lenofo. A gemi, if a person takes out a reed. A reed has the function in this very minimal society of serving as a temporary piece of string. It could serve as a hook for the nofo, for the sieve, for the flour. But the kavara, nofa and kavara are two kinds of sieve. One is a coarser one is a finer one. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kedei litol mimenu midas minol lekoton. Rabbi Yehuda says no, the minimal measure of the gemi, of the reed, would be to use it to take the measure of a child's foot before the parent goes out to the shoemaker to make a shoe for the child. He doesn't have a tape measure, so he takes a piece of reed and he says, I need it this long for the child. Nior, kedei lichtov olov kesher moichsin. The word nior in contemporary Hebrew refers to paper, and the Mishneh nior was papyrus. Nior, a piece of papyrus, how small could it be to make the person liable to the prohibition of carrying out on the Shabbos from domain to domain? Nior, papyrus, kedei lichtov olov kesher moichsin. In order to write upon it literally the knot of the mochsin, of the customs collectors. The Hebrew word meches refers to the customs of a country or a region, and the kesher mochsin, the knot or the seal of the customs officers would be a receipt they would give to a person if he had paid customs already on an item in one place, to show the people in the other customs office that he's already paid his dues on this item. So this is the kesher mochsin, a small receipt, probably having a couple of letters written on the papyrus. V'hamoitzi kesher mochsin chayav. Likewise, if a person were to take out an actual kesher mochsin, the actual receipt of the customs officer. In the previous section, we were referring to a piece of paper, a slip of paper, a notelet that would be big enough to put on it the receipt of the customs officer. Here, we're talking about an actual receipt of the customs officer. He'd also be liable if one carried that out on the Shabbat. Nior mochuk, if it is nior papyrus that is machuk, that has been blotted out, that they've washed off the first generation of what was written on it, that can no longer be used for a serious document in antiquity. You don't write a document over something that's been blotted out because you have no idea, maybe the previous document was blotted out and that was the real one and somebody forged it. So it has to be writable on. Nior machok, if it was a slip of paper that had been blotted, what can you do with this? Kedei lichroch al pi tzoloichis ketano shel paliotoin. Sufficient to bind around the mouth of a little jar of some perfume to preserve the fragrant odor. Now continuing on to Mishnah Gimel, the third Mishnah, or kedei lasos komea, a slip of parchment, sufficient if it were enough to make a komea, an amulet that will be carried for protective purposes, not an actual amulet. We already heard about the amulet earlier on, but here sufficient to write upon it, the piece of parchment, that or refers to untreated leather. Kalaf It's just the real parchment. Cloth is worked leather. It's called cloth parchment because the actual skin of the animal is peeled apart. There is a skin that is closer to the flesh and a skin that is closer to the skin. So the peeling process produces the cloth, the choice parchment on which scrolls of Torah and tefillin and mezuzah are written. If a person carried out as much as a piece of the cloth parchment, kedei lichtov olav parosha ktano shebatfillin, if it were even enough to write the very short with small letters portion of the tefillin, the head tefillin, where the four portions are each written separately in the four cubicles of the so-called phylacteries of the Jew. Shehi Shema Yisrael, the shortest of the four portions, is the actual Shema portion from Deuteronomy. And that's a fairly small slip of parchment. If anybody's seen actually unroll the parchment portions in the tefillin, the Shema is the shortest of all of them. Dio, if a person carries out some ink, then sufficient ink to write two letters. Dio kedei lichtov shtei oisios, ink sufficient to write two letters. Kechol kedei lichol ayin achas. The kahol is the blue. It's a cosmetic for the eyes, and if the person carried out the kahol, the eye shadow, sufficient if they carried out enough of it to darken one of the eyes. The reason why it's enough for one is because the modest girls of antiquity were going out with their head almost entirely covered and only one eye would be visible, so that was the only eye that they would actually apply the kachol darkener to. So with that, my dear friends, we conclude today's Kollel studies, and Israel time now is 16:32, and I believe that North America in the East Coast is 6 hours behind us, and Central Time 7 hours behind us, and the Pacific Time is 9 hours behind Israel, and I'll be back here, God willing, in an hour's time with this week's Shavuot Tov weekly discussion. So from Yerushalayim now, Shalom and my blessings, and look forward to being with you later.